Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Vav Amud Beis, 6b of Maseches Kiddushin. We're 4 lines from the bottom of the page. The Gemara quotes what appears to be actually what Shmuel had said back on Daf Hey Amud Beis. He said, "V'chein begerushin," so too when it comes to divorce. Nasan la gita ve'amar la, if a man gives his wife a get, a bill of divorce, ve'amar la, and he says, Hariat mishulachas, you are sent out, Hariat megurashas, another language of divorced, sent, Hariat mutaris l'chol adam, or he gives her the get, and he says, you are now permitted to any man, Harehi megurashas, all of those languages work. If he gives her a get, either, again, there's different opinions if this is what he writes in the get, or what he says to her, or both, but that works. The Gemara says as follows: says Pshita, it's obvious that if nasan la gita, if a man gives his wife a get, ve'amar lo le'ishto, and he says to her, Harei at bas chorin, you are now a free woman. What's obvious? That lo amar v'lo klum, that he hasn't said anything. That is not a language of gerushin, of divorce. That's a language of freeing a slave. She's not a slave. She's a wife, and that language doesn't work for divorcing a wife. She was already a free bastar, and she was already a free woman. But Amar la now that's for a wife. Now what about for a shifcha, a maidservant, someone who has the status of a slave and is owned? Amar la shifcha, so if he says to his shifcha, to his maidservant, Harayat muteres l'chol adam, he uses the language that one usually uses for divorcing a wife, but if a person uses that to free a maidservant, lo amar v'lo klum, so that doesn't work either. If he uses the language Harayat mutaris l'chol adam, you're permitted to any man, because that's a language of divorce. It's not a language of freeing a maidservant. And the truth is, it's not even true necessarily. Rashi points out that when you free a maidservant, she's actually now becomes a Bas Yisrael. She becomes a Jew, and she's no longer permitted to avadim, to slaves who she was permitted to before. So, in a way, it doesn't even make sense to say that you're now permitted to any man, because there are men that she's currently permitted to that she's no longer going to be permitted to after this bill of freedom is given to her. So that doesn't make sense for a slave. It does make sense for a wife, because when you give it to her, when you give her the get, she's now permitted to all the people that she had previously been forbidden to, and she's not really forbidden to anyone except right. Not even she can remarry her husband, even so, except if he was a Kohen, that would be different. But that's it on him, not on her. So basically, she's now by a wife. It's true, you're now permitted to marry any man. So those are obvious to us. So again, if he says to his wife, excuse me. If he says to his wife, you're a bas chorin, you're a free woman, that doesn't work. That's not a language of divorce. If he says to a maidservant, you are now permitted to any man, which is a language of divorce, that doesn't work for a maidservant. What's our question? Amar la le'ishto hariat la'atzmecha mahu. What if he says to his wife, you are now your own? Hariat la'atzmecha, you are now belonging to yourself. Mahu. Does that language work? Do we say that when a man uses that language, what it really means is not that she's divorced, but that now she's to herself, meaning her work belongs to herself, her profits belong to herself, her maisiyodayim, and see, normally in a marriage, the according to halacha, the husband, the wife's maisiyodayim, her profits, go to the husband, and in exchange, the husband has to support the wife. But they can make other arrangements. It's possible to make other arrangements. So what if he says, Hariyat la'atzmecha, you're now to yourself? Does that just mean that now you get to keep all of your profits, all of your production? Or, or maybe legamri ka'amar la. Or maybe no. That's a language of divorce. It means you're completely to yourself. You're now no longer married. Everything is yours. You're completely divorced. That's the question. So the Gemara says, Amar le Ravina le Ravashi. Ravina said to Ravashi, Tashma, come and listen, I'll answer you from a brisa. Titania, we have a brisa. The brisa says, Gufo shall get shichrur is hareata ben chorin hareata la'atzmacha. The essence of a get shichrur, there's different types. There's a get of divorce, a get krisus, that's a divorce get. A get means like a document. Or you can have a get shichrur, a freedom get, a freedom document. That's used to free a slave or a maidservant. So it's actually a Mishnah. The Mishnah says that the essence of a get shichrur, of the document that frees a slave, is to write either hareata ben chorin, that you are a free man, or hareata la'atzmacha, or you are now your own. That's the language you use. Says the Gemara, hashta. Now, uma eved kinani dikani le gufei. If a Canaanite slave who is owned, his guf is owned, the Jew who owns the slave owns the body, he owns the guf, and yet that language, ki amar le hareata la'atzmacha, if he uses the language of you are to yourself, it's legamri ka'amar le. That is a complete language. He doesn't just mean your work is yours, but he means you are completely free, because that's what the Mishnah says. That's a language that we can use. It's the essence of a get shichrur, of a get of freedom. So if it's true by a slave that completely frees him, so isha delokani le gufa, a wife who the husband does not own her body, doesn't have ownership of her, lo kol shekain, all the more so that language should work to free her completely. So the idea here is, even though we said earlier that tareat bas chorin, to say that you're free, that doesn't work. But tareat la'atzmacha, you belong to yourself. That's a language that can work here. You're not. She was always. To say you're free now, that doesn't work, because she was always free. But to say tareat la'atzmacha means everything is completely yours. So that works. The only question was, what level does he mean? Does he intend? Does he just mean that your production is yours, or does he mean, you're completely to yourself now? So the fact that by a slave that language means, even though the slave is completely owned by the Baal, by the owner, but now when he uses that language, it completely frees the slave. It means you're completely to yourself. So it says all the more so, a wife, he doesn't own the body of the wife, he doesn't own her, and he's just married to her. So that language of hareata la'atzmacha, all the more so that should work, that now you're completely on your own. So that was the first thing that Ravina and Rav Ashi dealt with. Then they continue and they said, Amar le Ravina le Rav Ashi, Ravina said to Rav Ashi, Amar la'avdo ein li esek bachmai. If a owner says to his slave, I have no esek bach, I have no involvement with you. Mai. Does that work? Does that work as a language of freeing the slave? Mi amrinan ein li esek bach legamri ka'amar le. Do we say that when he says I have no involvement with you or no business with you, it means completely, and he's completely freeing his slave? Oh, Dilma, or maybe limalacha ka'amar le. He just means for his work. He means I'm not going to. I have no involvement, I have no business with you, and I'm not going to benefit from your work anymore, but maybe he has not yet relinquished his ownership of the guf, of the body of the slave. So Amar le Rav Nachman le Rav Ashi. Rav Nachman said to Rav Ashi, Ve'amri la Rav Chanin mechoza. Rav Ashi, some say it was Rav Chanin who said it to Rav Ashi. Tashma, I can answer this question from a brisa. The brisa deals with this question. The brisa says, Hamocher, and again, our question is, what is this language of ein li esek bach? I have no involvement or no business with you. Is that a language that works for freeing a slave? So the brisa says, Hamocher avdo la'oved kochavim yatsa lechiros. If a person sells a slave to a non-Jew, he goes free. V'tzarich get shichrur me'rabo rishon, but he still needs a get shichrur, a bill of divorce, from his original master. So the idea is that we are not allowed to sell a slave. A Jew who owns a Canaanite slave is not allowed to sell him to a non-Jew. In halacha, actually, there's no concept of slave ownership for a non-Jew to a non-Jew, specifically from a Jew to a non-Jew, to a Canaanite. And the fact that when a person sells a slave to a non-Jew, so the slave, a Jewish slave, is actually obligating mitzvos, and when he's freed, he's actually completely obligating mitzvos. So it's a real terrible thing to sell a slave to a non-Jew. So therefore, because he's going to be put in a situation where he won't be able to keep mitzvahs. So therefore, we not only don't allow it, but also we apply a kanas, a fine, that now the original owner has to free him. So that's the halacha here. If one sells his slave to a non-Jew, he has to be freed, but he needs to get shikhr. That we have to free him properly. So he has to be given a bill of release from his original owner. So the Gemara says, the Brisa continues, says, Amar Reb Shimon Gamliel, B'amed dvarim amurim, when does he still need that bill of release? Shelo kasav alav ono. That's where the master never wrote a document for him. Aval kasav alav ono, but if he did write a document for him, zeu shechru, that document itself frees him. Now what's this document that we're talking about? So the Gemara asks, Heichi dami ono, what is this document that he might write when he sells the slave to a Gentile? Rav Sheshes explained, the kasav le, it's where he writes, if he writes that when you run away from the non-Jew that I'm selling you to, I have no involvement with you, I'm not going to reclaim you, that itself is a language that is a relinquishing of his ownership. So that's enough, really. It's enough, really, if he had sold him to the non-Jew and he wrote, if you run away, I'm not going to have any involvement with you, I'm not going to have any business with you. That itself, that language is a language of freeing the slave, and that means the slave is freed, because he can't really be sold to the non-Jew. So therefore, if he runs away, he will be a free man. And what we see from here is that language is a language that works. That is a language of freeing a slave. That was our question of Ein li'esek bach, I have no involvement with you. Is that a language that works? So we see from here that it does work. It's an interesting proof, I think, because it's an Amora explaining the Brisa. Rav Sheshes is explaining the Brisa. It's not clear where Rav Sheshes got this from, that this is the explanation of the Brisa, because he's the one who's bringing in this language of Ein li'esek bach. The Gemara still sees this as a proof that that's a good language. To me, it needs a little further explanation of how we can bring that as a proof, because ultimately the proof is coming from an Amora, unless they're just bringing it, they see Rav Sheshes as authoritative, and they're bringing the proof from Rav Sheshes' explanation of the Brisa. That's possible that that's where the proof is coming from. But again, the Brisa, the way Rav Sheshes explains the Brisa, it's saying that if you use this language of Ein li'esek bach, I have no business with you, I have no involvement with you anymore, that works to free the slave. Okay, now coming back to Kiddushin, the Gemara says, Amar Abaye said, HaMekadesh b'milva eino mikudeshes. If a person tries to be Mekadesh, to acquire his wife with a loan, so it doesn't work. What do we mean with a loan? What we mean is if he already had lent her money, and he says by the money that you have lent to you, that you should be mekudeshes with that money, so that doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? So Rashi explains, because that money that when somebody lends someone money, so that money is meant to be spent, right? You're not expecting to get the same coins back that you lent. So that money that he lent is no longer anything to do with him. She owes him money, but the money that he lent no longer has anything to do with him, so he can't be Mekadesh her with the money that he lent her, and say, I guess he would say, keep the money that I gave you, that I lent you, and that should be your Kiddushin. Well, that's not going to work, because the money that you lent her is no longer his anymore. It's meant to be spent, even if she happens to still have it, but it's meant to be spent. She owes him money, but it's different money, so it's any money. So therefore, he can't be Mekadesh with the money that he already lent her. Now behanas milva, but if he is Mekadesh her with the benefit, with a certain hana from a loan, a certain benefit from a loan, mikudeshes, then the Kiddushin works. However, va'asur la'asos king, but you can't do this, mipnei shaharamas ribis, because it's like you are not allowed to lend with interest, and this is some type of interest. The Gemara calls it haramas ribis. It's like a tricky way to do ribis. It's a backwards way to do ribis, to lend with interest. Now, what is the case that we're talking about? Hi hanas milva hichidami. what is the case of Hanas Milva? We're saying now that if you try to be Mekadesh with the loan that you already made, that doesn't work. But if you are Mekadesh with the Hanas Milva, some sort of benefit of the loan, so then we're saying that it works for Kiddushin, but you're not allowed to do that because it's some form of interest. So what's the case, the Gemara asks? Ilema de askafa. If you tell me that he actually, built in interest to the loan, de amarla arba b'chamisha, then you enter 4 and he said you have to pay me 5, and now he's saying, you know what, I'm going to give you back that 5th, you don't have to pay me back the 5th, you could keep it. That's the hana of the milva. That's a benefit from the loan, meaning I guess that he's not requiring her to pay back that extra zuz, that extra little bit. So maybe that's the hana, the benefit that he's offering her, and he's trying to be mekadesh her with that. So the Gemara has 2 issues with that. It says, first of all, haribis ma'ayasahi. That's not like a backwards ribis. That is ribis. That is interest. If a person lends 4 and says, pay me back 5, that's interest. That's forbidden. So that can't be the case. And then furthermore, hainu milva. That's the case of lending with the loan, meaning at the end of the day, he built that interest into the loan. So now she owes him 5. She doesn't owe him any specific, 5. There's no specific money that he owes her. So that she owes him, So that is itself like paying back, being Mekadesh with the loan itself, and we already said that doesn't work because there's no money to point to. He has to give her there has to be actual money, tangible money that, not quite tangible, but some sort of clear benefit that you could point to, and here that's part of the loan itself, which we said doesn't work. So the Gemara says, Lo tzricha da'arba zimna. No, the case is that he gave her extra time to pay back. And that has a value, and that's what he's being mekadesh her with. So normally, she will either have to pay him off to give her some extra time, or she would have to pay someone to convince him to give her extra time to pay back the loan. And since he himself is extending her this benefit free of charge, so that is a tangible benefit. It has value, it has monetary value, it would cost her money to get that, and he can be mekadesh her with that. So that would work for Kiddushin, the Gemara said, but however, it's forbidden to do so because it's haramas ribis. It has a hint of ribis, because I guess at the end of the day, he's lending her money, and he's using some added benefit from the loan, which has an element of interest. I think the very case that we're talking about, where you lend someone money and then you take money to you get bought off to extend the time, that is haramas ribis. That's it's not direct ribis, direct interest, but it's still forbidden because it looks like ribis, it smells like ribis, it smells like interest because you would be receiving something extra in return. You lent 4 and you end up getting back 5, not because they're paying you interest, but because they're paying you to extend the loan. But that itself is very similar to interest and would be forbidden. And so at least midrabanan would be forbidden. So the kiddushin that's done with that benefit works, because there is a benefit on a Torah level, but it's forbidden to do because it's very similar to charging ribis, to charging interest. The Gemara continues, it says, Amar Rava said, Heilach mana al manash tachzireili v'mecher al manash tachzireili. If a person says, here's some money, on condition that you give it back to me. So it's what we call matana al manas lahachzer. It's a gift on condition that it gets returned. So if I give someone money on condition that they give it back to me, so the Gemara says, b'mecher lo kana. If you try to buy something with that money, it doesn't work. It's talking about a kinyan mos, a kinyan that's made with money. So an acquisition that's made through money, that's the kinyan. So if I give the money but I say it's on condition that you give it back to me, that doesn't work to make an acquisition. Be'isha eina mekudeshes. If I tried to be mekadesh a woman with that money, it also doesn't work if it's on condition that she give it back to me. Be'pidyon haben ein beno padoi. If I need to redeem my firstborn and I give money to the Kohen to redeem my firstborn, but it's on condition that you give it back to me, Rava says that doesn't work. But betruma yatsa yidei nesina. If I separate truma from my produce and I give it to the Kohen, but I give it to him on condition that he gives it back to me, that works as giving of truma. V'asar lasos came, but says Rava, but it's forbidden to do that. Why? Because it looks like a Kohen who's helping on the threshing floor. What does that refer to? So the issue is that we don't want Kohanim doing things to curry favor that they should get truma. So we don't want them helping out on the threshing floor, because then that's currying favor with the farmers to give that they should give the Kohen their truma. And similarly, if a Kohen agrees to accept truma on the condition that he gives it back, so that's currying favor with these people that in the future they should give him their truma. So that's why it's not allowed to be done. But lemaisa, right? Practically, if somebody did it, then they would have fulfilled their requirement to give truma, and the rest of their produce would now be permitted to consume. They're just not allowed to. They're not allowed to do that. So the Gemara doesn't understand. The Gemara says, "Maika savar Rava." What does Rava hold here? Ika savar matana manasla hachsir shma matana. If he holds that giving a gift, giving something on condition that it gets returned, is called a matana, is called a gift, and it works. If we look at it like you gave it, so then afilu kulunami. So then all of these should work. If it works by truma, that matana manasla hachsir, you give it on condition that it gets returned. If it's called giving a matana, then it should work for a purchase. It should be considered paying, even though it's on condition that it be given back. It should work for Kiddushin. It should work for Pidyon Haben, for redeeming a firstborn. Where's the consistency? If he holds like it doesn't work, it's not considered giving something, because it's on condition that it be given back. So it shouldn't work for truma. Why does he say that? It works to give your truma. It allows you now to consume your produce. You've given truma from the produce. You haven't given anything, because it's on condition that it be given back. That's the first question. And furthermore, we know what Rava holds about this. Rava himself says that giving a gift on condition that it be returned works, that it is a matana. Da'amar Rava, because Rava said, if a person says, here's my esrog on condition that you return it to me, if a person takes it and then gives it back, he fulfills his obligation of lulav and esrog. And if he doesn't give it back in the end, then he's not yotze. In other words, he doesn't fulfill his obligation. In other words, the mitzvah of a lulav and esrog, it says, you have to take it for yourself. You have to own your lulav and esrog. What if you don't have one? So Rava says there's a solution. The solution is, matana manasal hachsir. Your friend can give you it as a gift on the condition that you return it. It's only yours on the condition that you end up returning it. So then, when he gives it to you, it is yours, and when you shake it, you have shaken your own lulav and esrog, on condition that in the end you return it. If you don't return it in the end, then it never was yours. But if you do return it, then it means that for that time it was yours. That's what Rava says. But we see that Rava holds, matana manasal hachsir works. It's considered a matana, it's considered that it's yours for that time. So why would Rava say that it doesn't work for a sale, for buying something, it doesn't work for Kiddushin, it doesn't work for Pidyon Haben, for redeeming a firstborn? Why? It should work. Give it, it's that person's now, and then they just have to give it back. So the Gemara says, Elam Ravashi, so rather Ravashi says, you have to say, I guess he's saying for Rava, I'm not sure. He says, Bekulu kani labar me'isha. Now really, for all of these things it works. It works for a sale. Matana amanas lahachsir. You give somebody money, and you say, I'm paying, but you have to give this money back to me, it still works to affect the sale, if the guy accepts it. If you give a Kohen money for Pidyon Haben, to redeem your firstborn, you give it to him, and you say it's on condition that you give me back the money, it works. But it doesn't work, but lebar me'isha doesn't work for Kiddushin. Why not? Lefisha ein isha niknis bechalipin. because a wife cannot be required through a kinyan chalipin. We talked about this earlier in the Masechta, that the kinyan of chalipin, which is when you give something to someone, they lift it up to be konet, and then that makes an exchange. So they lift it up to acquire. It's often done with a handkerchief. So I give my friend a handkerchief, he lifts it up, he acquires it, and then whatever he's selling to me, he's giving to me, becomes mine at that moment. So it's a special type of kinyan. It works even if the handkerchief is less than a shava pruta, even if it's less than a pruta value. It's a specific type of kinyan, and it doesn't work for Kiddushin, we learned. So this looks too much like chalipin. That's the issue here. Tosfos says it's not really chalipin. It's only midrabanan that it doesn't work, but it looks like chalipin. If a person gives a man gives a woman kiddushin on condition that she give it back, well, that's what you usually do with chalipin. You don't have to give it back, but you usually do. That's the whole thing. Is you give someone a handkerchief, they lift it up, and then they give it right back to you because they don't really care to keep it. That's how chalipin usually looks. So here, if a man gives his wife kiddushin on condition that she give it back to him, it looks too much like chalipin, and therefore it doesn't work. That's how Tosfos explains it. So specifically here, by kiddushin, it doesn't work. Amar le Rav Huna Mar, brother of Nechemia, Rav Ashi, Rav Huna, son of Rav Nechemia, said to Rav Ashi, the truth is, that's what we say in the name of Rava, just like you said. So even though originally the Gemara quoted Rava as saying differently, as saying that matana amanas la'achzir doesn't work by a sale, and it doesn't work by kiddushin, giving something on condition that it be given back, doesn't work by a sale, it doesn't work by kiddushin, it doesn't work by pidyon haben, but it does work by truma. That's our original version of Rava, but they're saying now our version of Rava was just like you, that it works for all of these things except for kiddushin. Kiddushin, it doesn't work because it looks too much like kinyan chalipin, because it's being given back, which is usually what happens by chalipin, and we know chalipin doesn't work for kiddushin, so we're not going to allow this to work for kiddushin either.